You don't blame these students, do you?
Look, it's a very difficult decision for them. I mean, they've got to weigh up what are the alternatives to starting their university studies if that's what they want to do. I mean, the alternative might not be much more attractive, Nick. The labour market's in turmoil. Sitting at home doing nothing is not an attractive option for many students either. So, to be honest, I'd be surprised if the levels of deferrals were ended up being quite as high as this suggests. I think when push comes to shove, most people will think, well, it may not be perfect, but better to get going than to sit around doing nothing.
That's if they've got 9,250 quid sitting in the bank, Mr. Johnson, of course.
No, Nick, the government...
the loan. I know the loan.
The government makes the loan available.
But they've got to pay it.
The loan goes straight to the university. The student doesn't touch 9,250.
But it has to be paid back, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, Nick, but you know well that the loan is only repaid once someone is in a graduate job earning over £25,700 after they've graduated.
But would you really urge a young person to get into debt if they can't get the whole university experience, for want of a better expression?
Universities are making pretty heroic efforts on the whole to provide a coherent online offering, taking into account the extraordinary and very rapid change of events that's sort of hit the sector over the last 2 or 3 months. I don't think, even when you look at Cambridge's announcement, it's sort of been a tiny bit overinterpreted. What they've said is they're moving all their lectures online. But as you know, that's not the totality of how Cambridge does its teaching. A lot of its teaching is in-person seminars or tutorials. There will still be a physical campus at Cambridge. It's not all just going to be sitting at a computer at home.
But it's 4.5 months away, Mr. Johnson.
Well, Cambridge is offering a blended mix of learnings that will, I think, offer a way of getting people onto campus, but also avoiding some of the more densely packed teaching sessions in lecture halls. I think it's, in a way, it's quite pragmatic. You say we'll still have some in-person seminars and tutorials, but we won't have the densely packed lecture halls. Those will do online.
It's an overused expression, Mr. Johnson, but of the university experience, how much of it is actually typically the young person leaving home, starting out for their first time, mixing with cohorts and putting an independent life together? How much is that part of the university life?
Yeah, of course, it's very important. It's very important to have that immersive experience where you're mixing with your peer group and you're meeting people from different backgrounds and you're growing up in what should be a safe environment, and that parents feel comfortable with young people entering. That is all important. You learn as much from your peers and the people you meet unexpectedly as you do from the lecturers. That is, of course, important, but that doesn't mean to say, and I can see where you're leading with this, Nick, that doesn't mean to say students should therefore demand a huge reduction on fees, because they're not getting that aspect of the university experience.
If not a huge, you'll be aware some private schools, and I appreciate schooling is different to university, but some private schools are offering reductions in the rate of 20, I've even heard of some instances 50%. Would it be that much to perhaps 20, 25% cut in university tuition fees?
Well, what I would say is that the university's cost base hasn't been substantially reduced by the fact that they will be, in some cases, offering some of their provision online. They're still, in many cases that I've seen, look at Bolton yesterday, for example, which announced that its campus was going to be open in September. In many cases, they're offering blended courses, which mean they not only have to have the physical campuses open so that they can receive students to do lectures, to go to the cafeterias, to use the libraries and lecture halls, but also they're putting a lot of content online and creating new ways of teaching online, which is actually in some cases going to increase their cost base to cope with the demands of this extraordinary situation we find ourselves in. So to say that they should get less money is a very challenging one for universities.
You have sympathy, though, for this group of children. I don't know if you heard me explain, I'm sure you're aware. They won't actually have their last day of school. They won't actually sit their A-levels. And possibly, in some instances, they won't have their first actual term physically at university. You must afford them some sympathy.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation for them. And, they have huge sympathy. And I see it directly myself. To see kids who've had their exams that they've been working hard towards cancelled, to be stuck with their parents at home for protracted periods of time is pretty tough it's a
For everyone.
it's a pretty tough deal.
And at the other end of the education scale, reminding listeners, of course, you're a universities minister, but at the other end, there's a bit of a row going on about primary schools. The plan is for 3 years in primary schools to go back as of June the 1st, appreciating that many teachers have been working anyway. But the unions are saying the date is rather arbitrary. The government is saying that we do need to get back to whatever the new normal is. Who's right, Mr. Johnson?
The government is absolutely right to reopen schools as fast as it's safe to do so. It's absolutely imperative that we get kids back into the classroom as soon as it's possibly safe to do so. I mean, the learning loss, Nick, that is taking place across this country is huge.
What do you mean by learning? Is this the gap between those?
No, there's obviously the inequalities between people who've got access to internet and who are taking advantage of the online material that their schools are making available, and those who haven't got access to IT and aren't taking or aren't taking advantage of those opportunities. That's one thing, and that's really important and worrying. But more for me, I just think there isn't really a like for like comparison between the online learning environment that kids, even with the best IT and the best online provision, there's no like for like comparison with that and what they get in a classroom, learning directly from their teachers in the surroundings of a school environment, with their peers. For me, that is learning loss.
But shouldn't the government have perhaps consulted more with the unions rather than just setting the date of June the 1st?
Look, I'm not privy, Nick, I'm not in the government to what level of consultation there's been, so I can't possibly comment on that. All I can say is that I fully support what the government's doing in trying to get kids back into school as fast as possible, as soon as it's safe to do so. And that has to make sense.
And broadly speaking, and it's an incredibly complex issue, how do you think the government has fared over the last 8, 9, 10 weeks?
For me, Nick, I think I focus not on the sort of day-to-day point scoring in Westminster, of which there's a hell of a lot. I focus on the two big things that I think the government has done really well. The first is, I think, putting in place the biggest welfare program that this nation has ever seen in the form of the furlough scheme, the job retention scheme. That has been a real success, and it's providing invaluable support to hundreds of thousands of families across the country right now, in the absence of which people would be going through real difficulties. So I think that is probably the single most important thing the government could have done right now, and they've done that brilliantly. And then the second thing, which I think they've absolutely succeeded, is in ensuring that our health system was able to cope with this extraordinary pandemic. The NHS was, we feared, going to collapse. It hasn't. Its capacity limits have never been breached. And I think those two things together are, for me, the two things that the nation absolutely required the government to do, and they've done it.
And they've achieved that, but was it perhaps at the expense of the care home sector, Mr. Johnson?
Well, that's a debate to be had. Let's see what lessons can be learned in future. But for me, the essential things are those two things. Families have had the support they needed in the form of the furlough scheme, and the health system has by and large coped with the pressures it was put under.
And today's headline, the pressures to the government to exempt foreign health workers from the so-called NHS surcharge. This is the idea of the extra payment that in some instances will not be levied on NHS people but will be levied on care sector. Surely, although it will cost £900 million, we're £300 billion in debt. Surely they should release that one.
Well, Nick, we're straying far away from the territory I was booked to talk about on your show, which was narrowly universities, and I don't really want to get drawn onto.
Okay, I've got to ask you one last question. People are worried. They think your brother's looking a bit pale. You know him better than almost anybody. How does he look to you?
He's making a fantastic recovery, and I'm so pleased for him and his family, and I'm just absolutely thrilled he's recovering as well as he is.
And can I put you down as a regular listener to Rachel Johnson's show on LBC every Friday?
Well, I hear about nothing else.